Okay, so are you ready to dive into this Web3 thing?
Yeah, let's do it.
It's one of those things I feel like I hear everywhere, but I don't really get it, you know?
It's very buzzy.
Yeah, it's buzzy, and I feel like I'm always like, oh yeah, Web3, I know what that is, but then when someone asks me, I'm like, I don't really know. So you sent over some stuff about Web3, and I think this is a good opportunity for us to kind of like break it down together.
Yeah.
So we have this podcast called Web3, The Future of a Decentralized Internet. I hope I'm saying that right, from Tech Simplified. And then we have a thank you message, which seems interesting. We'll get to that later.
Yeah.
Let's start with this podcast, though. What is Web3?
Yeah, so I think, like with any new technology or concept, it helps to understand how we even got to this point.
Okay.
So this podcast talks about how the internet has basically evolved in stages. So it starts with what they call Web 1.
Okay, Web 1. I feel like I remember this vaguely.
This was, the very early days of the internet.
Yeah.
Think like the 90s, basically just static pages. Very much like you're just reading.
Read only.
Exactly. It was like a digital brochure or a library.
Okay. So, like, if the internet was a mall, Web 1 was just like window shopping.
Yes, exactly.
You can look, but you can't touch.
You can't really interact.
Yeah.
Okay.
I like that analogy. So then we move on, I guess, to Web 2.
Right. So this is where things started to get more interactive.
Go on.
Social media came along, blogs, all these platforms where people could create content, share their thoughts, connect with each other.
Yeah, it's the internet we know now, basically.
Exactly. It's more like that bustling marketplace now. Instead of just window shopping, you can actually go in, buy things, talk to people.
Right, right.
Yeah.
But I feel like, and maybe this is what the whole Web3 thing is getting at, Web 2, it feels like we gave a lot of power to these big companies, right?
Yeah, for sure. That's one of the big critiques of Web 2.
Yeah.
All of this interaction, all of this data, it's all being controlled by a handful of really powerful companies.
Like, who are we talking about here specifically?
Well, the usual suspects, Google, Facebook, Amazon, all these companies that have these massive platforms that we all use every day.
Yeah, so they're collecting all this information about us. They're kind of deciding what we see, what we don't see.
Exactly. And that's where some people start to get a little uneasy.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so that brings us, I guess, to Web 3, the supposed solution to all of this.
Exactly. Web 3 is all about trying to decentralize the internet, take that power away from those big companies and give it back to the users.
Okay, but how do you actually do that? I mean, that seems like a pretty huge task.
Well, the key technology here is blockchain.
Blockchain, everyone's always talking about blockchain. I feel like I should know what this is, but can you explain it like I'm 5?
Okay, so imagine a digital ledger,
Okay.
a record of transactions. But instead of this ledger being kept in one place, like in a bank or something, it's distributed across a whole network of computers.
Okay.
So every time a transaction happens, it's recorded on this ledger, and everyone on the network has a copy. So it's very transparent and very secure because no one person can tamper with it.
So it's kind of like crowdsourcing security almost.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's actually a pretty good explanation. So how does this blockchain thing actually make the internet decentralized?
Well, because it takes away the need for that central authority.
Okay.
For example, let's say you're buying something online right now.
Yeah.
You have to go through a company like Amazon or eBay or whoever.
Right.
They process the payment, they handle the shipping, they take a cut. But with blockchain, you could potentially do that whole transaction directly with the seller without needing that middleman.
Okay.
Because the blockchain is handling the security and the record keeping.
Oh, I see. Okay, so blockchain cuts out the middleman.
Right. And that's just one example. There are a lot of potential applications for this technology.
Okay, this is starting to make a little bit more sense.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that this podcast talked about NFTs.
Yeah, NFTs are a really interesting part of Web 3.
Yeah.
So an NFT is basically a digital asset that's unique and verifiable.
Okay.
It's like a one-of-a-kind digital collectible. Think of like a piece of art or a trading card.
But like, how's it unique? I mean, can't you just copy a digital file?
Well, you can copy the file, but you can't copy the ownership because that ownership is recorded on the blockchain.
Oh, okay.
So even though there might be a million copies of that image floating around, only one person actually owns the original.
Okay, that's cool. So like, I'm a big gamer.
Yeah.
So if I buy like a skin or an item in a game right now, I don't really own it, right? It's more like I'm renting it from the game company.
Yeah, exactly.
But with NFTs, I could actually own that item.
Right. And you could potentially even take it with you to other games or platforms.
Whoa, that'd be awesome. I'm always so sad when I spend so much time like grinding for a cool item in a game and then the game shuts down and I lose everything.
Yeah, with NFTs, that's less of a risk because you actually own the asset.
It's not tied to that specific game or platform. That is cool. Okay, so we've got blockchain, we've got NFTs. It sounds like there's a lot of potential here for Web3 to really change things up.
Yeah, definitely.
So what are some of the other potential benefits that this podcast talks about?
Well, one of the big ones is data ownership.
Okay.
Right now, all of our data is basically controlled by these big companies.
Right.
But with Web3, the idea is that you would have much more control over your own data.
Like, what does that look like in practice?
Well, for example, you could choose to share your data with certain companies or apps in exchange for something like a service or a reward.
Okay.
Or you could choose to keep your data completely private.
So it's like I'm being compensated for my data rather than it just being taken from me.
Exactly.
Okay, that's pretty cool.
What else? Another potential benefit is increased security.
Security. How so?
Because blockchain is so decentralized and secure, it's much harder for hackers to target.
Oh, okay.
So things like identity theft or data breaches could become less common.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So we've talked a lot about the potential benefits, but this podcast also mentions some challenges, right?
Yeah, of course. No technology is perfect.
So what are some of the hurdles that Web3 needs to overcome?
One of the big ones is energy consumption.
Energy consumption.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
Some blockchain networks, especially those using the proof of work system, require a lot of computing power,
Okay.
which means they use a lot of energy.
Yeah.
There are more efficient systems like proof of stake being developed, but it's still an issue.
So, like, are we talking like it takes more energy to run a blockchain than it does to power a small country or something?
Well, it depends on the blockchain, but some of them do have a significant energy footprint.
Okay. So that's something to keep in mind. What
The
else?
other challenge is usability.
Usability.
Yeah, Web3 can be pretty complex and difficult to use, especially for people who aren't familiar with the technology.
Right.
The user interfaces aren't always very intuitive.
Like sometimes I feel like I need a computer science degree just to understand what's going on. Yeah, I get that. It can be a bit overwhelming.
Okay. So usability is definitely a barrier to adoption.
And then there's also the issue of scalability.
Scalability, what does that mean in this context?
Basically, can these blockchain networks handle a lot of transactions as more and more people start using them?
Okay.
Some blockchains can get bogged down if there's too much activity, which can lead to slow transaction times and higher fees.
Got it. So these are all like pretty big challenges?
Yeah, they're definitely things that need to be addressed if Web3 is going to become mainstream.
Okay, so we've got the potential, we've got the problems. What's the big takeaway here? Do you think Web3 is actually going to revolutionize the internet, or is it all just hype?
It's really hard to say. It's still very early days. It's
Right.
kind of like trying to predict the future of the internet back in the 90s.
Yeah.
Nobody really knew it was coming.
Right.
But if Web3 can overcome these challenges, it does have the potential to change things in a big way.
So like what kind of changes are we talking about?
Well, imagine a world where you have complete control over your own data.
Okay.
You can seamlessly transfer digital assets across different platforms.
Mm-hmm.
Online communities are truly owned and governed by their members.
Yeah, it's like the Wild West of the internet right now.
Exactly. Web3 could bring some much-needed order and fairness to the digital world.
I like that. Okay, so that's the podcast, but we also have this thank you message.
Yes, this message seems to be from someone who's very excited about Web3.
It definitely seems like they're all in.
It talks about all the potential benefits we've already discussed, but it also includes a call to action.
Call to action.
Yeah, it encourages people to join a specific online community.
Okay, what kind of community?
It mentions subscribing to a YouTube channel, liking and sharing a particular video.
Okay, so it seems like a way to stay informed about Web3 developments.
Right, it's all about building a community of people who are interested in this technology and its potential.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so I think we've covered a lot of ground here. Web3 is definitely a complex topic,
Yeah, for sure.
but I think we've managed to break it down into some understandable chunks.
I hope so.
So the big question is what happens next? Where do we go from here?
I think the key is to stay informed and stay engaged.
Mm-hmm.
Web3 is still evolving, so it's important to keep learning and exploring
Yeah.
and to think critically about the potential benefits and challenges.
So is there anything specific that you would recommend people look into or pay attention to?
Well, I think it's important to consider the ethical implications of Web3.
Ethical implications.
Yeah, like even if we solve the technical challenges, there's still a lot of social and economic questions that need to be addressed.
Like what kind of questions?
Well, for example, Could Web3 unintentionally create new inequalities?
Interesting.
Or how do we ensure that it's truly accessible to everyone?
Yeah,
These are things that we need to be thinking about as this technology develops.
I like that. Those are some really important questions to ponder. I think this has been a really helpful deep dive.
Me too.
We've learned a lot about Web3, blockchain, NFTs, all this cool stuff.
And hopefully our listeners have too.
Yeah, thanks for joining me on this journey down the Web3 rabbit hole.
It's been fun.
And to all of you listening out there, keep exploring, keep learning, and who knows, maybe we'll see you in the metaverse sometime.
Maybe.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
See you later.